You with session 51 of Old Testament Survey, and we'll be in Daniel chapters 10 through 12 to begin today. We may get just a little bit further, but this will probably take us all of our time today. Daniel has taken us a little while to get through because Daniel is an important book in a lot of ways. If Daniel were only about the proceedings of the various Persian and Greek and Roman goings on during the intertestamental period, as is the opinion of some commentators, it would be a relatively unimportant book, and frankly, most of us wouldn't study it. The reason that Daniel is important and worth studying is because of its direct connections to the book of Revelation. Many of the same things can be said about the book of Revelation. There are many Christian scholars who believe that the book of Revelation is not of any particular significance for the future. It's all about things that happened in the past. I don't believe that that's a correct appreciation for the book. One of the great characteristics of God, a phrase used in Isaiah and in some of the other prophets, is that God is the one who knows the end from the beginning, who calls out things that were not as though they were. For God, the future is instantaneously present to him. He knows the future not just by looking forward to see what will happen, but because it is it is an instant part of his plan. He knows the future in an intimate sense. And the outworking of God's plan is important to believers because we are minor players in that plan. It ought to be encouraging to believers to know that God is not taken by surprise, that God is not merely reacting to the forces of history. He is actively causing and moving and working within the events of history. And our lives are very clearly known and predicted and are cared for within that larger prophetic frame. So the study of prophecy is not merely something to argue about, although we do argue about it. We shouldn't. It ought to be a sense of deep encouragement. I've gotten enthusiastic about the study of prophecy for pastoral reasons. Years ago, I became a devotee of John Calvin's teachings on salvation. For the same reason that Calvin did, because it's encouraging to believers to know that God is in charge of history. It's good to know. And when we look at biblical prophecy, we're looking at the long outflow of salvation history. We are not, as the church, an afterthought in God's plan. And for that matter, Israel is not forgotten and is not an afterthought. God is not picking up pieces. He is, in fact, guiding a well-thought plan to its intended conclusion. And that's what we see when we look carefully at the prophetic literature. As we walk into chapters 10 and 11 and 12 of Daniel, we're going to see a really unique chunk of Daniel. The first part of chapter 11, well, all of chapter 10, chapter 11, is Daniel's interaction with the angel Gabriel. We learn some things about the heavenly interactions of the angels, which is something we don't find anywhere else in the Bible. And it raises more questions than it provides answers. It's still something that we need to look at. But Gabriel's message to Daniel is a series of events that will happen in the Middle East that will overcome Daniel's world. So Daniel is in Persia, and he is going to be overtaken shortly by the events of the Greek invasions. Alexander the Great will walk over the. Daniel will have missed that entirely. He'll die. But the Middle Eastern world will be overtaken by Alexander the Great, and then the four kings under Alexander who divide the kingdom will have detailed, difficult, sometimes very, very difficult results for Israel. And a detailed history of that period, what we call the Seleucid period and the Hasmonean period of Israel, is given to us in these chapters. And the predictions are provided roughly 200 to 400 years ahead of time. So Daniel is laying out a narrative history that has not taken place yet. And it unfolds the major events of the Persian, the Greek, the Seleucid, the Ptolemaic, the Hasmonean period, down to the time of a character by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes, and we'll talk about him as we get there. A very, very bad king, and the rise of the group called the Maccabees, the Maccabean Revolt. All of this happens about 167 BC. And so we see a period of time from around 450 or so BC down to about 167 BC, with detailed history, lots and lots of history. And every verse we can apply a date and names, and I can give you all of the specific things. After Antiochus Epiphanes, after 167 BC, quite suddenly in the text, it becomes difficult, if not impossible, normally impossible, to associate the details of the text with anything that has ever happened in history. And the commentators, of course, are divided about how to understand this. There are those who would say that biblical prophecy is never right anyway, so we shouldn't expect it to get it all right. Daniel made some good guesses, and he got lucky, but mostly he was wrong. Those of us who believe that the Bible is the Word of God ought to be impressed with the incredible accuracy of the prophecies from the time of Daniel down to the Hasmonean period of 400 years or so of history. That's amazing. And we'll talk about exactly some of the principles that are involved in that. I'm going to go to a screen share here, and I want us to be noticing something. I call this the vision of satanic forces and Israel's deliverance in chapters 10 through 12. And the hard part here is that these chapters are actually divided up into two sections, 10 through 1135. Is right in Daniel's time. It's in historic time, and it's already been fulfilled. After 1136, all the way to the end of chapter 12, Daniel's talking about specific events of the very end of history. And he makes that clear. The text is actually very clear about that. Now we can see what will happen at the end of all of this time. So let's take a look at all of this. There's some stuff here that I want you to see. The historical detail is quite amazing. It can be a little overwhelming. So I'll try not to bore you with too much history, but I do want to impress on you that there's an awful lot of history here. The first characteristic of the historical section that we're about to get into is the detailed nature of it. Lots of details, lots of precision. The relationships are clear. The relative dates are clear. There's lots of stuff in here that we can identify very, very clearly with specific events that happened in history. The second characteristic of this prophetic passage, and I'm going to emphasize this is a prophetic passage. This is not Daniel writing after the thing has happened. This is Daniel looking forward with God's Spirit to see what is going to come next. And there is, secondly, a careful obscurity to all of the details. So the king who rises up to attack Greece is not named. Now, God certainly knows the name and could have provided that name. He gives the name of Cyrus over in the book of Isaiah. So there's no question. Daniel already knows the name Cyrus. The king who will be very wealthy and do all of the aggressive stuff against Greece is a character named Xerxes. The same king who was the king for Esther. That's several hundred years still in the future. The prophecy, however, is deliberately obscure. The point of biblical prophecy is not to satisfy our curiosity as to the names and places and dates of things. And in this passage, we're deliberately not given names or places or dates very much at all. We're given just enough detail, primarily relationships, so that after the fact, we can tell for sure that these prophecies were literally fulfilled. Okay, that's the third point. And this is where I'm going with this whole lecture. And really, if you wanted to check out now, you could, because this is what I'm going to say. Then the reason that we conservatives interpret prophecy literally is that every time biblical prophecy has been fulfilled, it has been fulfilled literally. And that means that God's normal practice is to fulfill prophecy literally. There is no allegorical understanding here. As we look into the rest of the prophecies of Daniel, the four-nation time of the Gentiles prophecy, for example, or the 70 weeks of Daniel for Israel, those things are literally fulfilled. The parts that have been fulfilled already have been literally fulfilled. So Babylon, Persia, the Greco-Roman period, I believe even the beginnings of the Islamic Caliphate are literally fulfilled in history. The 69 weeks of Daniel for Israel literally fulfilled. The first coming of Christ happened right on schedule. That's literal fulfillment. It's only a case of special pleading to argue that the second coming of Christ will not also happen literally. And if the second coming is literal, then the events associated with that second coming also need to be understood literally. And this is an exercise that we go through at least partially to demonstrate the underlying principle of the literal interpretation of Scripture. When we interpret the Bible literally, we make good sense of it. It all fits together nicely. When we fail to do that, we simply make of the Bible an obscure, difficult, and incomprehensible book. So if you'll forgive me, we're going to launch right into Daniel chapter 10. We see in the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a nice historical note there so that Daniel knows exactly when this was happening. A word was revealed to Daniel, who was named Belshazzar, and the word was true, and it was a great conflict. Could be, and it concerned a great conflict. We'll stop there for just a second. This introduces the entire vision. The whole rest of the book is this one long vision. And we sometimes call this the terrifying vision or the terrifying vision of a man. The man who's going to be revealed is Gabriel again. Gabriel has spoken to Daniel before. We're also introduced into another archangel whose name is Michael. And Michael and Gabriel are the two named archangels in the Bible. There may be some others, but these are the ones who are given names. We're not entirely sure why that is, but these are the ones. And I suspect there are other very important angels. Paul talks about principalities and powers and rulers and high places, and this kind of thing. This chapter gives us an introduction to some of that. So I understood the word and had an understanding of the vision. So in those days, I, Daniel, was mourning for 3 weeks. I had no delicacies, no meat or wine enter my mouth, did not anoint myself for 3 full weeks. On the 24th day, as I was standing on the bank of the river, the Tigris, I lifted up my eyes, and behold, a man clothed in linen with a belt of gold, and it goes on to describe him. The sound of his words like the sound of a multitude, and I alone saw the vision. The men with me saw nothing, but heard a trembling, and they fled. So I was left alone and saw the great vision, and no strength was left in me. My radiant appearance was fearfully changed, and I retained no strength. And I heard the sound of the words, and I fell on my face in a deep sleep. Behold, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. And he said, "O Daniel, man greatly esteemed, understand the words I speak to you and stand upright, for now I've been sent to you." So this is, the message is a little terrifying, but Daniel, by this time, should have he should perhaps have gotten used to the unusual. And here he's being addressed by really a very great angel. And he stood there trembling, and the angel said, verse 12, "Fear not, Daniel. From the first day that you set your heart to understand and humbled yourself before God, your words have been heard." So there it is. The 3 weeks that Daniel has been fasting and praying have paid off. And Gabriel is going to go on to explain why it took 3 weeks. From the day that you set your heart to understand, your words have been heard, and I've come. But verse 13, the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me for 21 days. But Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I was left there with the kings of Persia, and came to make you understand what is to happen to your people in the latter days. For the vision is for days yet to come. So this vision is so important that Gabriel managed to fight his way through a blockade put up by somebody called the king of Persia, which is very, very odd. And frankly, we've got to worry about it. But first, recognize that the angel himself tells Daniel, "This is for you. This is a vision of the end of time, the very latter days, and far into the future." So the angel himself says this isn't a message for immediate consumption amongst your own friends. This is the far distant future. This is prophetic. And secondly, he alludes to this heavenly conflict that is going on. So Gabriel is sent, and on his way, he was withstood for 3 weeks by the prince of Persia, or the king of Persia. And he's fighting there with the kings, plural, of Persia. Now, if Gabriel is an angel, he's a spiritual being. He has all of the power and authority of God. What can possibly withstand a power like the angel Gabriel? Well, a similar and opposite pole power could withstand. If this were merely the human king of Persia, Gabriel could simply brush him aside, could kill him if he needed to. There would be no question of that. So the prince of Persia, or king of Persia, must be a reference to a spiritual being, a demonic spirit of similar power to Gabriel, which is interesting. And he is assisted in this by other similar satanic powers. Michael comes to help, and between the two of them, they're able to fight their way through the blockade and bring this message to Daniel. Later on, Gabriel says, I'm going to return. This is in verse 20. He said, "Do you know why I've come to you? But now I will return to fight against the prince of Persia. When I go out, behold, the prince of Greece will come." The prince of Greece. Now, the king of Persia, of course, was Cyrus. The king of Greece at this time didn't exist. There was no Greek empire at this time. But Gabriel is not speaking of Alexander the Great, who in fact will be mentioned in chapter 11. Gabriel is speaking of yet another spiritual being. The impression that we get, and all we have is this tiny little detail that there is an angelic conflict. There is a spiritual war going on in the heavenlies. In the unseen world, far above, in the presence of God, there is a war going on that is spiritual in its implications. And we human beings are a part of this war by our participation with God in it. Daniel is a participant. He's not an observer. He's a participant. As he prayed, he brought on the intervention of Gabriel. And this tremendous battle was fought in order to bring Daniel this message. The whole thing is fascinating. It provides more questions than answers, actually. So I would love to know: does Satan appoint angelic princes for every nation? Is there a prince of China? Is there a prince of Ulaanbaatar? Is there a prince of what? How does this work? Does it filter down to the local level? So there's an angelic demonic prince of Guagua. I don't know. Is there a demonic prince of Milan? Honestly, I don't know, but I find it fascinating. Christian writers have tried for years. C.S. Lewis wrote his entire space trilogy to try to get a handle on this heavenly conflict. A fellow by the name of Penn Warren wrote the the title of the book is gone. But Christian authors have tried for years to try to come up with a way of understanding this spiritual warfare. And I will admit that I don't fully understand it. I know that there's something there. The demonic thing at the national level, at the political level, is actually probably very important, and is probably something that we have very little control over, except to the extent that we interact a little bit locally. When we vote, or when we purchase things, or when we have our little bits of input. But for the most part, we pray and we try to live godly lives to, I hope, encourage the angels to do what they do. At any rate, it's all very, very strange. And Gabriel says, "I'll return and fight against the prince of Persia. Then the prince of Greece will come, but I will tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. For there is none who contends by my side against these except Michael, your prince." Fascinating stuff. Okay, that takes us to chapter 11, and this is Gabriel continuing the story. And the whole rest of the book is Gabriel continuing this vision. As for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. Now I shall show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. All right, so now we get into this detailed history of the period. The 4th king in the line is the rich king. I will. The 4th shall be far richer than all of them. His name is, let's see here. This is another Darius, and I've got my dates messed up. He's going to start a battle with. No, this should be Xerxes. My goodness, my notes are all wrong. The 4th one is Xerxes. When he's become strong, he shall stir up the kingdom of Greece. Stir up again all against the kingdom of Greece. That's going to take place at 480 AD at the battle of, or 490 AD or BC at the Battle of Marathon, an actual place north of Athens, about 26 and a half miles, and that's where the marathon race comes from. The Persians arrived in vast numbers and were outmaneuvered and outfought by the small army of Athens, which went to stop them. Following that, there's a number of important battles. The Battle of Salamis, one of the largest sea battles ever fought, was fought by the Persians against the Greeks. The Persian-Greek war is going to go on for quite a while. In verse 4, well, let's see, in verse 3, a mighty king shall arise who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. That mighty king has got to be Alexander the Great. He took power in 325 BC. Alexander essentially rose to conclude the war against the Persians. This is a thing that had gone on for 150 years. Philip of Macedon fought against the Persians, but it was Alexander who won that battle. Now, we've already talked about Alexander and his history. This chapter simply gives us another bit of that. And as soon as he has arisen, verse 4, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the four winds of heaven. Okay, there's the parceling out of the kingdom. This took place in 323 BC. Chapter 5, we see that there's a king of the south. Okay, there's a king of the south and a king of the north in this chapter. The king of the south is the Ptolemaic king. The kings of Egypt in the Greek period were called Ptolemies. The kings of Syria, which includes Israel, were called Seleucid, and they were named after the Seleucus, the general. So the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. The king of the south is the Egyptian king, the Ptolemy, who will be strong, but one of his princes will be stronger, and he shall rule. So there we have a palace coup, which happened fairly regularly amongst all four of the Greek kingdoms. And his authority shall be great authority, but after some years they shall make an alliance. And the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. Okay, the daughter of the king of the south going to the king of the north would be a diplomatic marriage. And we're told here that she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure. She shall be given up, her attendants, and he who fathered her, he who supported her in those times. What happened? Well, she died. Okay, do we have any historic records of that? Yes, we do. The Ptolemaic king, we don't need a name for him, but the daughter's name we have. Her name was Bernice. Berenice. She died under exactly these circumstances in 250 BC. There was a caravan of the royal retainers with the princess to go to the king of the north for marriage, and she was stopped on the way, and the entire group was murdered. That began a long period of war, 100 years war between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. And from a branch from her roots, a Ptolemaic root, one shall arise in his place. He shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north. That happened at 243 BC. That was Ptolemy III. What is the name of that particular king? Yeah, that's 247 to 243. We see the invasion. In verse 10, there's an invasion of the north. It took place in 226 BC. In verse 11, we see a southern counterattack that takes place. That's in 221. In verse 14, in those times many shall rise against the king of the south, and the violent among your own people shall lift themselves up. Okay, that's the first Jewish revolt of the Hasmonean period. The first Jewish rebellion. This, according to Josephus, the date is probably between 198 and 200 BC. In verse 18, we see, oh, wait a minute, before we get in there, we're going to start seeing a really interesting bad guy. He who comes against him shall do as he will, none shall stand before him. This is verse 16. He shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his hand. That's the king of the north, is going to do all of these things, and boy, will he be powerful. He shall set his face to come with strength of his whole kingdom, and shall bring terms of an agreement and perform them. He shall give him the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom. The daughter of women to destroy the kingdom is Cleopatra. That Cleopatra. And Mark Antony was involved with Cleopatra at this time in exactly this situation. It's all fascinating. And the study of the history of the period is extremely complex. There's lots of stuff to study there. And God doesn't predict everything, but he's predicting enough here that it's obvious that he knows exactly how all of this is going to work out. So there's the daughter of women, verse 18. Afterward he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall capture many of them, but a commander shall put an end to his insolence. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back upon him. And he shall face back toward the fortresses of his own land, but shall stumble and fall and not be found. So this northern king will die. But then shall rise one in his place. The introduction in verse 20 is or in verse verse 21 is the contemptible person whose royal majesty has not been given. So this is happening amongst the Seleucid kings. Both the Ptolemies and Seleucids had a tendency to assassinate one another. And the Seleucids, we don't know exactly what happened to the Seleucid king there. This is an Antiochus, the something or other. This next character is called Antiochus Epiphanes. And we're going to be seeing Antiochus Epiphanes for the rest of this session. Antiochus Epiphanes is the king from 175 to 164. He is a usurper. That is, he is not a legitimate king. He's not in the royal order at all. I believe there were a lot of usurpers during this time. He was often called the willful king. He does whatever he wants. He doesn't ask anyone's permission. He doesn't try to cooperate with people. He simply makes his own will preeminent. He is a thoroughly evil character on a lot of levels. We see a lot of details here. Verse 22, armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. 174 BC, the prince of the covenant would be the high priest of Israel at that time. His name was Onias II. And he was killed in either 174 or 168. I have both numbers in my notes. Sometimes I find it really interesting that I can't even get my notes to agree with one another. The rest of the story continues for the rest of this paragraph, and I'm going to go fairly quickly because it's not all that important. But Antiochus Epiphanes is this really notable character. He is the contemptible one. In verse 29, at the time appointed, he shall return and come to the south, but it shall not be this time as it was before. Ships of Kittim shall come against him, and he shall be afraid and withdraw, and shall turn back and be enraged and take actions against the Holy Covenant. Okay, what happened? This event of verse 30 is the arrival of ships from Kittim. Now, Kittim is probably somewhere in the Mediterranean. Who are these ships really from? Well, they were from Rome. And this happened in 168 BC. A Roman consul, accompanied by a whole fleet of ships, anchored off the coast of Israel, and the consul came ashore with his detachment of soldiers, with the rest of the ships, Roman galleys, war galleys, just offshore, and the consul met with Antiochus Epiphanes and essentially said to him, you're going to need to settle down here. We've allowed you little kingdoms to do what you will here in this corner of the Mediterranean, but there is going to be peace now. And you're going to go back to wherever it is that you do your kingdom, and you're going to do that, and you're going to stop causing problems now. And if you don't, there will be consequences. The Roman consul drew his sword, and there on the sand of the beach, traditionally near Ashkelon in Israel, the Roman consul drew a circle in the sand around Antiochus the king, and told him, this is your kingdom, Antiochus. As soon as you leave this kingdom, you're going to be killed. This is your spot. To stay here, or we'll kill you. It'll be as simple as that. Antiochus went back to Jerusalem and took out his anger on the temple. He was afraid, and he turned back, paid attention to those who forsake the Holy Covenant. And forces from him shall appear, and profane the temple and the fortress, and take away the regular burnt offering, and shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. Oh, difficult stuff. What Antiochus actually did was to put an end to sacrifices in the temple. And instead of allowing the sacrificial system in the temple, he insisted on the sacrifice of a pig on the altar of burnt offering in the temple in Jerusalem. This is the abomination of desolations, or the most desolate abomination would be another way to say that. What Antiochus did there is historically the worst thing you could possibly do in Israel. That is absolutely the nastiest thing you could do. And the result of this was, the Maccabean revolt. He'll seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. There are always going to be, in every culture, in all of history, there will always be a remnant of God's people who know their God and take their obligations to God seriously. Those people will will do what they need to do when the time comes. And here in Daniel, we see this description. The wise among the people shall make many understand, for some days they shall stumble by sword and flame and captivity and plunder. When they stumble, they shall receive a little help. Many shall join themselves to them with flattery, and some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be terrified, or may be refined and purified, be made white until the time of the end, for it still awaits the appointed time. Okay, down through verse 35, we're able to find in our history of the Maccabean revolt, primarily in the historian Josephus, we're able to find details that match all of these verses. I'm not going to bore you with those, but it starts getting very difficult. There are bits and pieces that we can't find in history. There are things that just don't have any matches at all. We can see the chaos of the Maccabean revolts, but there's not enough detail given here to match with everything. We know what happened in history. The Maccabees took over. Judas Maccabeus became the leader. He drove out the Seleucids, and so the last of the Antiochians were driven out. After a while, the kingdom became what we call Hasmonean. It's the Hasmonean dynasty. It was actually Edomites, Idumeans, and the Herods eventually took over out of this down to the time of Christ and beyond. Israel was not, during this period, an independent kingdom. The Hasmonean dynasty was a client kingdom of Rome. So this is the shift from more or less Greek control to more or less Roman control of Jerusalem. During this entire period, the Temple Mount continued to be under the control of the Gentiles. So the time of the Gentiles continues. Antiochus Epiphanes is not the Antichrist, but he is a picture or a type of the Antichrist who is to come. Antiochus Epiphanes is an object lesson of the willful king of the end time. Verse 36 begins to tell us about the time of the end. And there are these 7 basic principles that are going on here. We're going to start out. This is the characteristics of the end of time, and I think it's significant that Daniel concludes this way. Verse 36 is not Antiochus, for in fact Antiochus died. Verse 36, and the king. Well, which king is that? Well, the prince who is to come in Daniel 9:26. The prince who is to come. This is the Antichrist. The king will do as he wills. He will exalt himself and magnify himself above every god. And he shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. Okay, so every god means all of the various world religions. This is an anti-religion, anti-God, certainly anti-Christ character. He is a human king with superhuman power, but not of his own. He shall prosper until the indignation is accomplished. The indignation is another word for the abomination of desolations. There is, at the midpoint of the tribulation period, the book of Revelation says, the abomination of desolations will be made visible in the holy place. That's what Daniel is speaking of. He shall speak astonishing things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation. For what is decreed must be done. He shall pay no attention to the gods of his fathers. Perhaps he has pagan roots, or perhaps he has a religious background. Which religious background? Well, the Bible doesn't actually tell us. I've suggested earlier that the fourth Gentile power has to be Islam, controlling the Temple Mount up until the end of history. That it will climax with a 10-nation grouping of some kind, the humiliation of three, and the rise to power of a little horn. This is the Antichrist. This is the prince who is to come. This is the willful king. I believe that this willful king, therefore, has a Muslim background, but I do not believe that he is a practicing Muslim. I don't believe the religion of the end time will be Islam. Let's look at this. He shall pay no attention to the one beloved of women. Who is the one beloved of women? We don't know. Actually, there's a number of suggestions for that. Some have said the one beloved of women is obviously Christ, so this is the Antichrist. Others have said, no, the one beloved of women is obviously Muhammad, so he is an anti-Mohammedan. And others have suggested, no, the way to understand this passage is the love of women. And that means that the Antichrist is a homosexual. Forgive me for bringing up a delicate matter, but that's entirely, any of those are possible, actually. And the fact is, we don't really know. He shall not pay attention to any other god, for he shall magnify himself above them all. So here is someone who has missed the whole point of the book of Daniel, which is, and I'll quote this from way back in the beginning, something Nebuchadnezzar learned when he went out on his field trip. There is a God in heaven, O Nebuchadnezzar, and he is not you. And what the Antichrist believes is that there may be a God in heaven, but the Antichrist is him. And even Satan probably can't put up with that for very long. He shall magnify himself. He shall honor a God of fortresses instead of these. So his God is a God of fortresses. He's going to be involved in an arms race. A God whom his fathers did not know, he shall honor with gold and silver, precious stones and gifts. He shall deal with the strongest fortresses and help with the help of a foreign god. Those who acknowledge him, he shall load with honor. He shall make them rulers over the many and shall divide the land for a price. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall rush upon him like a whirlwind. Okay, what is this? Well, this we typically call this paragraph the Battle of the Three Kings, and it provides for us nothing but questions. Now, it would be really, really handy if some Seleucid king had gone to war alongside one of the Ptolemaic kings against Antiochus Epiphanes. But historically, that didn't happen. Antiochus was the Seleucid king. And so we can't get three kings. The him in this case is the willful king. This is the self-absorbed, this is the Antichrist king. The king of the north is a power from the north, the power that will involve for sure Syria, perhaps Asia Minor, perhaps Mesopotamia. The king of the south will involve Africa, for sure Egypt, but perhaps other nations of North Africa. Today, if this were to happen, these would all be Muslim rulers, and they would be joining together to fight this Antichrist king in Israel. Look at this. The king of the south shall attack him, but the king of the north shall rush upon him with chariots and horsemen, many ships. They shall come into countries and overflow and pass through. He shall come into the glorious land, which is Israel. Tens of thousands shall fall, but these shall be delivered out of his hand. Edom and Moab and the main part of the Ammonites. Very odd. He shall stretch out his hand against countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He shall become ruler of the treasures of gold and silver and all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Cushites shall follow in his train. But news from the east and the north shall alarm him, and he shall go out with great fury to destroy and devote many to destruction. And he shall pitch his palatial tents between the sea and the glorious mountain, yet he shall come to his end with none to help him. The sea is the Mediterranean. The glorious mountain is the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. So this battle will come to a conclusion with Antichrist defeated at the in the hill country of Judea. Somewhere along the coastal highway. The timing of this is a bit of a problem. We don't know exactly when this will happen. It is very tempting to associate this battle with either Gog and Magog, Armageddon, or both. I think it is safer to say that there will be, in the time of the end, a very great war. And by saying that, we're safe, because that's clearly what's going to happen. But so far, what we've seen is this rise of a tyrannical ruler and the event of a very, very great battle, a tremendous war, a world war, maybe, a great war, certainly. What else is there? At that time shall arise Michael, the prince who has charge of your people. There shall be a time of trouble, such as has never been since there was a nation since that time. Okay, sometimes we say tribulation. The idea of a great tribulation for Israel is clear in the Old Testament, and it is clear in the New Testament. The distinction between a 3.5 period of covenanted peace and a 3.5 year period of terrible tribulation for Israel is detailed for us in the New Testament, in Matthew 24 and in the book of Revelation. And this is what is predicted here. There'll be great trouble until that time, but at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name is found written in the book, and many of those who sleep in the dust shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Okay, so there's something else going on here. There's a deliverance for God's people and a resurrection at this time for blessing and for judgment, a reward for the righteous. This looks like the final judgment. This looks like the conclusion of all things. This is not fulfilled in the history of Antiochus Epiphanes. Is there a single religion at this time? It's popular to speak of a compulsory religion at the time of the end. It appears to be that he will insist on one religion, and most prophetic writers speak of a one world religion. What that would be, I'm not sure. It appears to be humanism today, but how will all of the others be stomped out? Can Islam become a world religion? I don't think so. I don't see how that would be. Nevertheless, that's very common. So we see more of the details of the end. Verse 12:3. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the sky above, those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end. In other words, this book is sealed. It won't be fully understandable until the time of the end. Remember the principle of deliberate obscurity. There are some things we're not really going to understand until the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. How odd. That's a description of the nature of things at the end of history. Characteristic number one, many shall travel to and fro. Traveling up until roughly 100 years ago, or actually even as recently as 50 years ago, travel over any distance was a rare adventure. When I was a boy, I didn't know anyone who had traveled overseas except for the Second World War. Our parents participated in World War II, our fathers, and so they had traveled, but that's what it took. And since that time, air travel has been invented, really. It was invented before then, but it has become actually possible. Who would have guessed 50 years ago that an old professor like me would have been to most of the Northern Hemisphere? I've been all over America. I've been all over Europe. I've been in Russia. I've been in the Philippines. I've been in Africa. I've been all over, and that's something that 50 years ago, a person in my circumstances would never be able to afford. Will it become even more? I don't know. One of the characteristics of the end time is that the technology will exist to take the gospel to the uttermost parts of the earth. And frankly, that exists today. We travel in order to set things up. What we're doing right now, this very moment, is a connection. I'm looking at the pictures of all of you right now, and I see pictures of people all around the world I am with my voice right now reaching out to the uttermost parts of the earth, to the ends of the earth, and sharing the gospel. It's an amazing fulfillment of the prophecy of Daniel. Many will run to and fro. Travel will become common, and communication will be easy. Knowledge will increase. 500 years ago, there was a character in Florence named Leonardo da Vinci, and I've always enjoyed studying Leonardo. He was considered the Renaissance man. Leonardo knew everything. He knew music and mathematics and astronomy and aeronautics and space and chemistry. He knew everything. He knew a little bit of everything that could possibly be known. Today, there is no such thing as the Renaissance man. There is no one alive who is brilliant enough to do what Leonardo did because there is simply too much knowledge. I know an awful lot of things. My students used to say that I am a vast warehouse of useless information, and I am. Sometimes I feel like my mind is filled with all kinds of stuff that I have no particular useful purpose for. It just sits inside my head and it's ready to come out. I guess eventually I'll have to write some books. But the knowledge has accelerated till more and more and more and more people are gathering more and more knowledge. We store it on computers today. And not only has the storage of information, of knowledge, gotten out of control huge, the space in which it is contained has become smaller. I'll show you a little something here. I'm just going to pick up my laptop, and if you can see the image on the side, this is not a laptop. This is my iPad. It's a little bitty iPad, and this iPad has my Bible software on it. In that one little iPad, I currently have over 7,000 volumes of Bible study books. 10 years ago, that would have been an impossibility. 50 years ago, an impossibility. To keep 7,000 books, you would need the whole floor of a library building. Now, to put it on a computer would have required a computer the size of a boxcar. Today, we can carry these things around in our carry-on luggage. We can travel to and fro, increasing knowledge everywhere we go. We have fulfilled these prophecies. Now, I'm belaboring that point because I want to make the point that very little needs to happen before the end of time can come. I'm not predicting that it will. What I am saying is that we are no longer in a stage of history where we're obviously looking at thousands of years of history to unfold in front of us. It may, but I don't think it's necessary anymore. And then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, two others stood, one on the bank of the stream, the other on the other bank. And someone said to the man clothed in linen, "How long shall it be to the end of these wonders?" And that's a good question. And unfortunately for us, there's not a good answer. And someone said, "How long shall it be?" And I heard the man above the waters raised his right hand toward heaven and swore by him who lives forever that it would be for a time, times, and half a time. 3.5 years. So how long will the terrible tribulation last is probably the question being asked here. 3.5 years. The 7 weeks, or the 70th week of Daniel, the 7-year tribulation period, has to be 7 years long, and it has to be divided into 2 3.5 year periods because of this passage. Let me finish it. Time, times, and half a time. And that when the shattering of the power of the holy people comes, which will happen in the middle of the tribulation period, and end all, that when shattering of the holy people comes to an end, all these things would be finished. And I heard but did not understand. And then I said, "Oh Lord, what shall be the outcome?" He said, "Go your way, Daniel. The words are shut up and sealed until the time of the end. Many will purify themselves and make themselves white and be refined." In other words, there will be a lot of saved people to join you in heaven, Daniel. And my friends, you and I are among them. He's looking at all of the rest of history as the gospel is spread to the world. He said, "Go your way, shut up the books. But none of the wicked shall understand." I found that continues to be true. I find it more and more difficult to communicate with those who are on the non-Christian side of the aisle. But those who are wise will understand. Biblical prophecy is not ever something that I would share with non-Christians. Frankly, they cannot possibly understand it. We Christians have a very difficult time understanding this material. Non-Christians don't have a prayer. They've got no hope to ever get anywhere close to it. What can we really say? I think it's a bad mistake to use eschatology as an element of evangelism. Telling people to get ready because the rapture is about to happen, I think is silly. They don't believe in the rapture. They're not going to flee the wrath to come. They don't believe it's coming, and they'll have trouble understanding it. So it's not a good idea. Many shall purify themselves. Those who are wise will understand. And from that time, that the regular burnt offering is taken away, and the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there shall be 1,290 days, which is a little short of 3.5 years. Blessed is he who waits and arrives at the 1,335 days. Oh, how difficult. 45 days later, a month and a half longer. But go your way till the end, and you shall rest, and shall stand in your allotted place at the end of the days. Oh, my goodness, what a difficult book. But I think in some important ways, this book of Daniel is encouraging. Daniel gives us a detailed outline, a project outline for all of the rest of history. And there is the clear promise here that we Christians are a part of this much larger plan. God is doing a great thing in the world. He's doing a wonderful thing in the world. And we're in on that. And more than simply being in on that, we can understand it. We can understand God at work in the world. We can see Him for who He is, for the God who gives wisdom to those who follow Him. We can thank Him for that and continue to understand Him. At any rate, I'm going to quit there. That's been a long lecture through 3 chapters. Well, let's see here. I need to unmute everybody. Let's see, more, unmute. Okay. Anybody who'd like to unmute may unmute, and you can say hi to us. We're going to be leaving now, and we'll see you again on Wednesday. Bye bye. We love you
Bye.
all. There they are.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Hey, love you guys.
Thank
And
you, Dr.
Bye,
Jan.
Jan.
Thank you
yeah,
so much.
bye bye, guys. Bye bye. Oscar, let us
Bye-bye.
know of the ongoing food project in the Philippines. Let us know what we can do.
Okay.
Bye bye, everybody. See you
Thank
all. Love
you.
you.
Bye.